the first question that is asked for your homework is, what are the three components of the criminal justice system? If you turn to the first page of your textbook, you'll see the very elaborate answer to that question. What are the components of the criminal justice system? Your textbook offers you a very detailed display to help you understand the criminal justice process and the components that are involved in that particular process. We're going to spend lots of time navigating through each of these processes. First, policing. The second, courts. And the third is corrections. And within the context of each of these, you're going to find little subcomponents. Now, for this homework assignment, you need to explain and describe the components in detail, which means that you want to start off with police. And what happens there, this is the portion of our system where you're going to actually enter this particular system. So you're going to interact with police who have an immense amount of discretion that they're going to use with regards to whether you're going to enter the system or not. Typically, if you enter this system, it's because you've committed some type of crime or you're involved in crime in some type of way. What is criminal behavior? When you are breaking the law. What are laws? Laws are sanctions. They're rules and regulations that are based upon what the norm is in society. So if the general consensus in society is that this is a violation of behavior that we do not want you to act out, then typically we're going to have something written to say that this is a law. This is something that we do not want you to violate. And if you break that, then you are participating in crime, right? Criminal behavior. And you don't want to do that. Does anybody in here want to be a criminal? Has anybody here broken the law in the past 24 hours? Have you broken the law?
Yeah. I jaywalked.
You jaywalked?
Yeah.
Speeding? 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 Not using your turning signal.
Oh, I've done that.
Okay. All right. So now the next stage with regards to entering the system is actually reporting. Reporting whatever is happening. We talked about reporting, right? We talked about the Uniform Crime Report. We talked about the Crime Victimization Survey. We talked about this idea of reporting criminal behavior. So it's going to be measured, it's going to be reported, and once it's reported, you will have a criminal record. Some people are able to expunge that record, and some people are not. Why aren't they? Maybe the system says what you did is something that we're not going to erase. This is such a horrible thing that you participated in that we're not going to erase this. Maybe you're a child, a juvenile, and you did something wrong, and at the point that you become 18, your record is automatically expunged via whatever the documents say, whatever the courts say at that time about whatever your conduct is. So if you don't act up again before you're 18 or 19 years old or even 21, then we're going to erase this. So there's a major process going on with regards to juveniles and adults. And we understand that the juvenile justice system is less formal. And some people have called it informal, but we're just going to say that it's less formal than our criminal justice system. Now, obviously, if you're going to enter the system, there has to be some type of evidence. Some type of evidence to show that you actually performed what it is that you've done. Because these police officers have to have proof that you've actually committed a crime. So there has to be an investigation of some type. Some people, you go in and you're not able to show that you did not do something. That means that you may not have the money. You may not have the money to prove that you're right. You may not have a reference or a person who can support you. So in those cases, the police and what they have to say, that's the absolute word. But some of us are able to bring other people in, other authority figures in, and to demonstrate or to show that we did not do this. And in that case, maybe you will get off. The arrest is when we bring you into custody. Once we bring you into custody, then you are going to be dealing with the correction system. So the police are going to deal with you up until the point where you were arrested. And then after that, then you're transitioned to another part of the system. So when you write about this, the detail that I've just given, you want to explain and describe. So what you want to do is you want to look at these terms under police: crime, reported and observed crime, investigation, and arrest. You want to look at those, and you want to look into your book and see what your book has to say about it. Think about the brief conversation that we had about this and offer a little detail to answer that portion of the question. Next, courts. Now, when you're dealing with the courts, you have not only the circumstance where you're actually going in and there's some type of trial going on, but there's also a pre-trial investigation that occurs. There's a lot of things that happen behind the scenes with regards to the court system. Some folks are arrested, but then after you're arrested, your lawyers will deal with the judge, or they will deal with some other form of administration and negotiate back and forth. They will talk back and forth and come up with some type of plea bargain. Sometimes that plea bargain will help us understand that you don't even have to go through the court process. So some people, after you're arrested, you may never deal with the actual court system itself. Maybe people will negotiate your fate before you even have to enter the court system. So this is why money is so critically important. This is why reputation is so critically important. This is why the person who you have representing you, who you choose to represent you, becomes extremely important, because that person can have those charges dropped by bringing in evidence. Or that person can represent you in a way that they introduce your character, maybe sometimes even being, better than what it actually is. So someone could come in with documents and information, and they can make you glow. They can make you shine, like the Kool-Aid kid. They can make you look fabulous and get you out of trouble if they have the gift of gab or the social network or the relationship with somebody to allow them to put that best foot forward and to represent you. So think about that. Status, proof. And think about what our criminal justice system looks like now. So who are our criminals? Typically, as we're going through this class, as you're reading your textbook, as you're watching the videos and understanding, you'll see that typically people who don't have that support, or people who don't have money, those are the people who are going to enter our system. Those people who have other sources of support, they may enter the system as well. Maybe they do something and they're not able to get around it. But there's much discretion in our criminal justice system. You all are the future. You are the people who are going to decide, am I going to let this person get away with this because they have more status than another person? Or am I going to treat everyone equally? Or I'm going to treat everyone with respect, or I'm going to look at these details very critically and use my discretion accordingly. Or am I going to help my friends out? Or am I going to use the power that I have, the discretion that I have, to help certain people and not help others? Those are the choices that you all are going to have to make moving forward. So we have bail or detention hearings. Is everybody allowed to have bail? Why do you think someone would have the opportunity to pay bail money? Why would they have the opportunity to pay bail money?
They're not that much of a flight risk.
The risk factor is extremely important. So are you going to hurt somebody if we let you go? Right? And are you going to come back? Do we trust you? Are you reliable? When someone is charged with something, they're not actually a criminal until they're proven guilty. So some people think, oh, well, this person got arrested, so they're a bad person. Well, you have to think about that when you're actually in charge, when you're in a field where you have that discretion that you can use. Are you going to look at people as, bad guys as soon as they walk in the door, or are you going to give them the opportunity to prove that they didn't do whatever it is? So these are things that you have to start thinking about. Typically, they were arrested, they were brought in, they have cuffs on. That's that image, symbolic image. You see somebody at their worst, and then you begin to judge. Is that what you all do, or do we call it discretion? Is discretion a judgment? I need you to think about all these things very critically, because when people have power, they don't sometimes like to look at discretion as judgment. They like to look at it as a part of the job, where you use a particular criteria and you have the ability to decide whether someone's going to be successful or whether you're going to put a stamp on their record that impacts what they do probably for the rest of their lives unless they're able to get rid of it. That's the type of power that you're going to have if you're involved in this particular stage. Preliminary hearings. So this is the point where we're going to kind of talk to you about what it is that you did wrong and what that means with regards to our legal system. So no matter who you are, if you're charged with something, you have to know what that is. You have to know what you've done wrong and what type of time you may have to pay. You know, what's the price that you have to pay for whatever it is that you've done wrong. People shouldn't be brought into the system and have no idea what they're being charged with, have no idea what the potential time is going to be that they would have to serve, and not know what it is that they need to do in order to move forward. So they should have some type of discussion. There should be some type of dialogue where you understand what your fate is. So do I need to get a better lawyer? Did I actually do this? You're arrested and you're brought in and you're sitting there waiting. Now you think that you're arrested for stealing a bike. But you find out that when you took that bike belongs to someone very important. So now they've changed the charge on you. And so now you're being charged with something else. You think you're probably going to have to do a community service, but it turns out that you may have to do 5 years. 5 years in jail for taking a bike. Well, why did you take that bike? You took that bike because you had to get somewhere really quickly. You got a text message that your mother was on the floor choking and you had to get her. You had to get to her somehow, some way. Well, all of these things matter because if you can bring someone in during that hearing, if you can bring proof in, you know, I didn't take this because I'm a thief. I took it because this was going on and I had to get this and I'm going, you know, I planned to take this back, but I was caught and now all of these different things happen. So, mens rea. What are your intentions when you're going to actually do something? And should you be charged with this maximum penalty for whatever that is? During that preliminary hearing, you should have, if you are being charged with something, if you've been arrested, you should have the right to explain and describe actually what you did and why you did that. And there should be some type of negotiation process where people are discussing, you know, what are you actually going to charge this person with? And there should be a negotiation going on with regards to whatever that is. Some people are allowed to negotiate, some people are not. That's where it becomes very challenging in our criminal justice system. So many informal circumstances happening outside of the context of the rules and regulations that are written down on paper. Who will be allowed to have a lesser charge and who will not? Charges filed. Once the charges are filed, they're on paper. So before the point that those charges are filed, there's lots of negotiation that can occur. So you think about that. You know, do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be the person who gathers the information? Do you want to be a paralegal? Do you want to be a police officer? Do you want to be the person inside the police office documenting information? Do you want to be the person who takes, you know, maybe fingerprints? Do you want to work for the organization that works to provide lawyers at a lesser charge for the person who's in trouble? Do you want to work at a community service organization? The place that we send people when, their intentions weren't really to hurt anybody or to do that criminal activity in the way that a real criminal would, commit the crime. But we do need to punish this person. So how are we going to punish them? We're going to have to punish them by having them do something really good in the community. So, if you have a good heart, let's use that good heart in the right way. Let's not use your good heart to hurt somebody. And we want to do that as a form of rehabilitation. Sometimes we want to rehabilitate people, and sometimes we call it just desserts. We just want them to get what they deserve. You did something wrong, and you need to get what you paid for. You need to go to jail for a very long time. You punched my sister in the face? Well, I can't personally punch you back, but that time's going to punch you back. So I want to make sure that you get exactly what you deserve for what you've done. So again, here's another thing that we want to think about. Do we want to rehabilitate these folks who aren't necessarily criminals because we haven't charged them yet, right? Do we want to rehabilitate them, or do we want to just punish them? And sometimes, just retribution, Not only do I want to punish you, I want the 3-strike rule, I want to lay you down, You do this one time, you're a fool. You do it 2 times, shame on you. 3 times, you're going down. So sometimes when we punish somebody, we want to not only punish them, but we want to set an example. We want to set an example for other people. So you see that if you do this in this particular community, if you continue to act like this in our community, we're going to punish you so that everybody can see that you shouldn't do this. So there are all these different ways that we deal with charging people for whatever it is that they've done. And if you are thinking about just desserts, that doesn't mean that you don't have a heart. You know, you want somebody to be punished for what they've done. That doesn't mean that you aren't a good person or that you're some type of evil cop or an evil lawyer or an evil judge. It means that you are closely aligned with the rules and regulations and the sanctions, and that you believe that if you do something wrong, you should accept the punishment. You are willing to take action. You are willing to do it. So now you understand that you violated the law, and now you should be punished. So adjudication. This is the part where you're going to be in the courtroom and we're going to present evidence of some type. And in our class, we're going to talk about different types of evidence that you can present and how that evidence can affect the court case, can affect whether someone is proven innocent or guilty. During this process, obviously, you're going to sometimes have a jury, and then other times you may just have, a judge. And then other times, it may be a situation where there is a lawyer and a judge, and you're not there. And those people are negotiating, what happens or what goes on with you. And it all depends on the jurisdiction. It depends on where you are, right? What state, what city. And it depends on the type of crime that you've actually committed. So when we begin to talk about the courts, we will break that down to the ground. We'll start at the bottom. We'll have a little pyramid, and we'll break it down, and we'll talk about, each of the stages, and we'll even talk about different states. We'll say, Virginia versus Maryland, what are the distinctions there, and, how do those state court systems work, and, how are they the same or how are they different? We'll talk about West Virginia as well, because West Virginia is totally different, for whatever reason, than the other states. They have a different local court system. Sentencing and sanctions. So now, you all understand that when folks are sentenced, sometimes they may have an option called intermediate sanctions. You may have an option. Sometimes you may get probation. You know what probation is? Anybody ever heard of probation? You get probation, that means that we're going to say, you're not going to go to jail right now. You have a certain amount of time where you have to get your act together. There may be a fine connected to probation. There may be community service activity that you have to do. It may be even, a curfew or something like that connected to probation. There may be guidelines with regards to where you can go and where you cannot go, who you can affiliate with, or who you cannot affiliate with regards to probation. But there's a difference between parole and probation. Someone gets parole after they've already been locked up. They've already been in jail. They're already in the system. And then we say, a parole board, you understand, not the courts, a parole board comes in and they say, well, we're going to let you out, but here are the stipulations, and once you complete this time, then you're sort of free, right? Sort of free. But you could also go to these camps where you go in and they're high security and you have to prove that you're going to change who you are and how you do things. You have to demonstrate that you're willing to invest in understanding what social order is all about. That's about rehabilitation. When I tell you I'm going to send you for 50 days, I'm going to send you to a facility where you have to work out, where you even have to do schoolwork, where you have to interact in certain ways, where you have to exercise, where you have to do work in the community. So this is a full program, and our goal is to show you how to be responsible, to show you how to be a citizen, to show you how to respect yourself and how to respect other people. And we think that by doing this, you'll have a better chance of not coming back into our system. Recidivism. We don't want people to come back after they're locked up. We want to produce a human being who is ready to go out there and actually live and make good choices and not do the same things that they did to get in the first place. So sometimes we have programs where people aren't just going to be locked up for a series of time. Instead, they're going to do something else. So when we decide whether we're going to rehabilitate people or whether we're going to be, die hard, like, you do the crime, you pay the time, there's also different ways that we can punish them. And discretion again, right? Discretion again in the hands of whomever decides this. So who, in fact, is worthy of serving a lesser time? What is it about this person that makes them a better candidate than the other person to go through this special program that we have in this particular state? Who gets to decide that someone can actually go on a leave from their job instead of being fired, and that in their records it won't show that they committed this crime or that crime until after they've actually completed this program? So this person who's a criminal has a chance to come out and to have a record that would be more decent than somebody else's. But there's some human being out there who can decide whether Johnny or Kevin are allowed to be in that program. Do you want to be the person with that type of choice? Do you want to be the one who decides which of these people are going to have a better opportunity in the future when both of them committed the exact same crime? Do you want to be the person with that responsibility? That's what you have to think about before you go into these different positions. You have to think about whether you're able to make those types of choices. Are you going to feel bad after you decide that one person can go here and the other person who did the exact same thing is going to be positioned right here? When you see their family members crying, when you see their children crying, are you going to feel bad? Are you going to be hurt by that? Or are you going to say, this is my job and I understand what my responsibilities are in this job? Can you handle that? Corrections. Now, we talked a little bit about sentencing and where they'll go. But then when we talk about corrections, we'll talk about the specific details. What are the dynamics? What are the details that are involved? So with regards to probation, what is the job of a probation officer? What do they have to do? And some people look at the job of a probation officer, and you look at the job of the parole officer, and you're like, well, I hear that the parole officer needs, a master's degree, whereas the probation officer, may have this, 4-year degree. And you think about, what does this person have to do? Well, the probation officer, chase people down, you have to look for them, find them, go to the job, run from here to there, Well, do I want to do that? Is that the job that I want to do? That's what we'll talk about when we talk about probation. We'll lay out the position. We'll talk about, how they're affiliated with the system. Does the probation officer have to interact directly with the judges, with the lawyers? What types of relationships do you establish or build as a probation officer? Well, remember we talked about this for a few minutes ago. If someone's on probation, they may have community service connected with the probation, right? Which means that the probation officer has to be affiliated or has to build relationships with all these different people out in the community. If you want to be a probation officer, are you a talker? If you're an introvert, this is probably not the job for you, the probation officer position, because you have to interact with people on a regular basis. You have to go out there. You have to be able to shake and move. You have to be able to negotiate. You have to be able to talk to people. So if you really, I really want to go into being a probation officer. Well, there are a few skills that you're going to have to develop along the way. So this class is going to be an excellent class for you to look at these different positions throughout the criminal justice system and think about, what do these positions require? What are the responsibilities? And do I have what it takes mentally, physically, personally, to be able to handle whatever this is that I have to do? Now, last but not least, are you free if you're on parole? Sometimes, you serve time, and then people think, oh, well, this person served time, and then they were able to get out on parole. You don't understand that sometimes there's a transition between, being in jail, something here, and then parole. Sometimes you have to go to a halfway house. You have to stay with, other people that you don't know. and you have to stay locked up in this particular house, and you can only go outside from this time to that time. You can only go and apply for jobs, and sometimes you have to have an escort with you. Sometimes you have a curfew. You have to be in the house by 6 p.m. You can only have telephone calls from this time to that time. There's a special telephone that you can use, but all of these different things happen when people are on parole. But some of you, maybe you don't know anybody who's had to deal with this before, or you just see these television shows. So in this class, when we talk about parole, we'll talk about real situations, and we'll talk about what people go through and some of the transitional circumstances that people have to deal with when they're actually on parole. The goal of this first question is to get you to understand, what are the core areas of the criminal justice system, and what do you want to get out of a class like this? What are some things that you're going to learn? And I want you to start thinking critically about those 3 areas and think about, is there a job within these particular areas that you may be interested in? And then when we begin to talk about that stuff, focus your attention so that you can ask questions, and so that you can look up things, and so that you can better understand the direction that you're trying to go in with regards to the area of criminal justice. Okay? That's right. And there's some heavy details here. Some people think that the Bill of Rights is just this simple understanding, that we have. Number one, once you are charged with something, right? Once you are convicted and charged with something, we cannot go back and try to try you again for whatever that is. You have a right to life, liberty, and property. Tell me what life, liberty, and property is. What do you all know about life, liberty, and property?
We're all entitled to it.
Break it down. What is property? What is having the right to property?
Your material possessions.
That's right. That's right. So can I come in and take your stuff? Can I just come in and take something that belongs to you? I'm a police officer. I want to come in and just take your stuff and use it.
In a particular neighborhood, you can.
In a particular neighborhood, you can. Police officers do not have the right to just come in and take your things. They could do that and say this is for the greater good of the particular community, and then have some support. But they do not have the right to just come in your house and cook a cheeseburger and eat your food, and just do whatever they want to do. When you all move into this particular field of study, please understand that you may have some privileges, but you don't have the privilege to disrespect and take over the ownership of someone's property. You do not have the right to go to the movie theater and shoot somebody because they're texting. I'm going to read this. Individual rights guaranteed by the Bill of Rights. A right to be assumed innocent until proven guilty. Talked about that a little bit, right? Innocent until proven guilty. Please remember that. I keep pounding that in just a little bit for you. Yeah, you may be for just desserts. You may be all about retribution. But someone is not a criminal until they've been proven guilty. Maybe you have an idea of what a criminal looks like, or what a criminal acts like, or how a criminal walks, or types of things that criminals say, the type of attitude that a criminal might have, the types of clothing that criminals may wear. But once you become a professional, once you step into the field, then you have to have enough respect to understand that this person is just like you and I until they've actually been proven guilty. How difficult is that for us, though? How challenging is that for us? You see a case, some person, you think that they may have, murdered someone, or you think that, they may be charged with, selling meth or something in the community. Well, what if your brother is addicted to meth? And so now this person is being charged with, selling meth in the community. Are you going to treat them differently as a police officer or someone in the criminal justice field? Are you going to treat that person differently because you have a family member that is involved in whatever that circumstance is? Or are you going to be able to step back or step aside and look at that person as being innocent until proven guilty? Those are the types of choices that you're going to have to make. I need you to think critically about that. You're going to have to set aside your personal life and think critically about how you have to do your job. Easier said than done. Right to an attorney. Sixth Amendment. Right to a speedy trial. Sixth Amendment. So when you look at the Bill of Rights, these are some critical points with regards to due process. When you answer this question, I need you to explain and describe all three of these amendments and their role with regards to due process. I need you to be able to understand the whole idea of being fair. And you also need to know why this is necessary. You know, why do you think we would have to implement something like this in our criminal justice system? Why would we have to say this? Shouldn't you all know? Shouldn't this be common sense? Shouldn't it be common sense that this person should have just as much respect as this other person? Well, it gets a little fishy. I like to ask questions like, you know, illegal immigrants, illegal aliens, people who don't have citizenship. Do they deserve equal protection? They're human beings. They're here. If an illegal alien is shot and they're laying down there and they're injured, do they deserve the same treatment? Do they deserve the same rights? Access to the same system? Or, you know, because they don't have citizenship, do we disregard due process? Issues of discretion, then we're going to pick and choose. We're going to decide for the greater good of the community, and we're going to talk about that next, right? When we talk about individual rights, right? When we talk about public order, we're going to talk about whether we do things in our society for the greater good or whether we do it based upon some type of law, rule, or regulation that we have in a particular society. But I want you to try to answer the question, because when we start to think about communities of people who don't ordinarily receive rights, that's when this stuff becomes important. That's why we needed this stuff in the 1960s. Because we had huge issues with regards to people of color, women, people with disabilities. We had all of these different groups of people who were not receiving this same type of treatment and respect. And if you'd asked a group of people, such as yourself, in a class, this same question, it would become silent, just as it is right now. Because the question becomes, are these people folks who deserve life, liberty, or property? Do they actually deserve to have the rights that everybody else has? Do they have enough status for us to treat them the way we treat other people? And so we pick and choose and we decide throughout our history who deserves these types of rights or not. And why. So this is why this is important. Not just because it's common sense, but because of our discretion and how over time we decide who we want this to apply to or not. And you have to think about that as an officer, as a lawyer, as someone working in the system. Who deserves to have the rights that you have? Because you're going to be able to answer that question. You're going to be the authority figure who decides who's going to receive great treatment and who's not. Across the board, no matter which sector we're talking about in the criminal justice system, you're going to have the discretion to have somebody else. You're going to have somebody's life in your hand, right here. And you're going to be able to decide whether you want to lift them up or push them down. Or are you going to decide that today, people who look like this, they can't have this type of respect. People who look like this, they might strap a bomb to their bodies and kill me. People who look like this, they're just going to kill the grass. People who look like this, they have roaches. People who look like this, they can't read. People who look like this, they can't eat at my house. All of these things that people say at the kitchen table, those are things that you got to throw out the door when you want to move into a field like this. You have to say, well, these things that I learned as a child in my home, some of these things aren't necessarily valid, and it's not the right thing for me to do with regards to my discretion. And now I have to look at something else. I have to look at this. I have to think about equal protection. I have to think about whether, this person deserves a right to a speedy trial. Well, if someone rapes your sister, should they rot in jail? Or should they get a speedy trial like everybody else? Sometimes at that time, we don't have this strong element of forensic science. And we can't figure out what this solution is going to be. Or we can't predict what technologies we'll have in the future. But we can't go back Because we didn't have it together, we can't go back and try it again. Once it happens, it happens. Brush it off your shoulder and keep moving forward. And that's a philosophy that you all have to understand. You do your best, and the best is all that you can do. And then after that is done, you cannot go backwards. You have to move forward. This is a system where we move forward. And that's something that's really tough for people to digest. It's a system where you move forward. Because there are times when these things didn't happen. And you could be the type of person who says, you know, oh, I don't want to service this particular group of people because 20 years ago, this group of people killed all of these other folks. But can you hold a grudge and hold it on your shoulders and be ready to service this one community and not be willing to service another? Yeah, you probably could, but I'm trying to show you otherwise. Try to be positive. Try to think critically about what you can do to make the system better. And try not to hold grudges, because when you hold grudges, you're only reinventing whatever happened the first time. You're just doing it in a different way. So we have to try to move forward. We have to try to understand what we've done, understand what's going on, what's happened, and then have a system that works to improve the circumstances for other people. Everybody? Individual rights versus public order. In the 1960s and 70s, strong time of due process, we had this idea of promoting individual rights. This idea that there are so many people who are being disrespected and violated in our society because of maybe how they look, maybe where they live, all of these different ideas. We need to have a system that is going to respect and support individuals. So we're going to look at these case scenarios and we're going to understand what happened with this individual. We're going to look at things like, why did you do this? Why did this happen? What were the circumstances surrounding this particular challenge that you experienced? We have to do that because there's so much hatred. There's so much hatred. There's so much discrimination going on. And so in order for us to have a system that will really work, we have to begin to look at things on a case-by-case basis. And we have to have a system that has more regulation, more strict regulation, more rules and regulations, more detail. We have to go back in the law and we have to find out, you know, where, within the context of this law, where do we have little lines, descriptive ideas that attack individuals and their ability to have life, liberty, or property. Where do we say things like, this is good, if we find out that a black man has raped a white woman, they get the death penalty. If a white man has raped a white woman, they get this many years of time. If a white man rapes his white wife, that is not a crime. So we have to go back and we have to begin to focus on this individual rights circumstance. And we have to see where in our law we have clauses that violate individual rights and someone's ability to be treated equally. So we have to focus on that because all throughout our system we have things like that written in with regards to race, class, and gender. And so if an individual is charged with something, they need to have equal protection. And so it becomes very important for us to focus on individual rights because without that focus, people would be treated differently. One person would be charged this for the same crime, vice versa for another. Another key here is understanding what it's like for a certain group of people or for a situation to threaten you and to threaten your life as a whole. What types of rules and regulations do you have to have in place? What types of guidelines do you have to have in place when you feel like you have to do something to protect society as a whole? So when you have things like bomb threats, when you have increased rates of, people being shot up at colleges, then you have to start changing rules and regulations and doing things a little bit differently. And so then the discretion, the element of discretion gets a little fuzzy. And we start creating possibilities for us to treat people indifferently, because they may be a threat to society as a whole. And that is the difference between public order, when we create laws and rules and regulations that are designed to protect society as a whole, versus individual rights. So there are times in our history where we have a strong element of public order law. And then there are other times when we have to shift to individual rights. And we'll see, as we're talking about laws and rules and regulations, we'll see how that happens. We'll see how, right before our terrorist attacks, we had a strong individual rights movement going on for women and gay and lesbian people. But then, as soon as you had the terrorist attacks, you're trying to take me out. As soon as we had the terrorist attacks, then we begin to change discretion, the way we have rules and regulations, all of those things change, and we see something else happening simultaneously, which is very interesting. When you have something like a terrorist attack going on, then that sometimes triggers religious rights, sometimes triggers other beliefs, other ideologies that battle that original journey. Because when people are put in a mindset of public order, then you start seeing their institutional values kind of shining. When I say institution in sociology, an institution is like, the economy, politics, religion, education. You start seeing their ideas about those types of things coming out at you. So, okay, if there's a terrorist attack, how's that going to affect education? How's that going to affect the criminal justice system? How's that going to affect politics? How's that going to affect money, the economy? How's that going to affect that? And when we see that happening, we tend to lose focus on individual rights. Because right now, we're trying to protect society as a whole. We're not necessarily worried about what's going to happen with our economy. So we decide that we're going to change the rules and regulations for public order, and we have all these new ideas that come in for terrorist support. When we start changing our ideology and we start thinking about the public as a whole, every time we shift our laws and rules and regulations, it affects our education system, it affects politics, it affects everything. It affects all the institutions. Whenever we make a major political change like that, it affects everything. But if you have one budget, I call it one pie. If you have one pie and the way you look at that pie changes, then that's going to affect how you distribute everything. How we look at people, how we understand people, how we make choices, right? So, as a human being, as an individual in this class, after those bombings, after 9/11, did you look at people who practiced Islamic religions? Did you look at those people differently? Did they have to meet different standards? Did they receive the same amount of respect? And so that's how this changes, because once you start thinking about public order, then it somehow transitions and it affects life, liberty, and property. Access to education, access to money. It impacts all of these different things when you change your philosophy on how you want to treat people and how you want to understand a situation. It's very important to understand, especially if you're going into the field, because you have to understand what happens when there's an ideological shift in the criminal justice system. It changes everything. It changes who has access to what, who can do what, how we treat people. And it also creates sort of a hierarchical shift. You know what a hierarchy is? The higher you are up in the system, the higher you are, the more power you have. Well, if one group is shifted to the bottom, then another group gets shifted up. So anyway, there's a huge shift occurs. And then that changes how another group of people are treated in our society. So it's not just about the group that is impacted by the ideological shift. It's about what happens in our hierarchy when you push one group down and pull another up. It makes it very confusing with regards to due process and who you want to criminalize or not. and how you view people, how you understand them, how society tells you to see people, how they want you to understand people, who they want you to punish, who you want to be, this picture, who is a criminal? Who is that? What does that picture look like? If I ask you to draw a picture right now, draw a picture of a criminal, what's that picture going to look like? Well, that changes, it shifts. What that picture looks like shifts when we transition from individual rights to public order. You get it?